In this video, we are going to talk about one of the most frequently asked questions that I get from people who contact me, and it is Canadian citizenship vs. U.S. green card. Which one is actually better? And what if you have dual citizenship or dual residency, and you have the option to choose between becoming a Canadian citizen or getting your green card in the United States? Which one should you choose? Well, stay tuned because I am going to break down all the pros and cons of each of these options for you. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm a lawyer, and this channel focuses on all things immigration law, citizenship, and travel. The U.S. has one of the strongest passports in the world. You must have a minimum income for 3 out of the past 5 years and be physically present in Canada for 1095 days out of the past 6 years. First up, we'll talk about the Canadian passport. If you decide to become a Canadian citizen, you will receive a Canadian passport, which is ranked as the 8th most powerful passport in the world. So, if you are concerned about being drafted, you don't have to worry about that in Canada. If you get a green card, you will gain the right to live and work in the United States permanently. You will also be able to apply for U.S. citizenship after 5 years. A U.S. green card also gives you the right to travel freely in and out of the U.S. and allows you to qualify for certain government benefits, such as food stamps and public transportation discounts. Taxes are probably the biggest downside of a U.S. green card. As I mentioned earlier, you will be required to pay taxes on your worldwide income to the IRS. This means that even if you live abroad, you still need to file U.S. tax returns and pay taxes on any income you earn regardless of where you are living. In addition to this, the U.S. has one of the highest tax rates in the world. Overall, becoming a Canadian citizen is a great option if you're someone who wants to travel frequently, doesn't mind paying slightly higher taxes, and doesn't want to deal with the hassle of reporting your worldwide income to the IRS. Well, the truth is that there is no clear winner. It all depends on your individual circumstances. If you're someone who travels frequently, doesn't want to deal with the hassle of filing taxes in multiple countries, and wants to live abroad permanently, then becoming a Canadian citizen might be a good option for you. However, if you want the right to live and work in the United States, want to qualify for government benefits and don't mind paying higher taxes, then getting a U.S. green card might be a better option. Ultimately, the decision is up to you and your family. I hope this video helped you understand the pros and cons of each option so you can make the best decision for your unique situation. With this passport, you will be able to travel to 164 countries around the world without obtaining a visa beforehand. Also, let me know in the comments below which citizenship you would choose. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. So, if you're someone who likes to travel, having a Canadian passport is a huge benefit. However, if you want access to the U.S., you will need to obtain a U.S. visa before traveling there. Canadian citizens can visit the U.S. for up to 6 months without a visa, but if you want to work in the U.S., you will need to get a worker's visa. Additionally, if you decide to become a Canadian citizen and you currently live in the United States, you will be giving up your right to vote in U.S. elections, of course. This shouldn't make much of a difference unless you're really passionate about politics. Or, alternatively, you must have been physically present in Canada for 183 days in each of the 6 years before the year you apply. However, the top marginal tax rate in Canada is 33% compared to 37% in the U.S. So overall, you won't be paying quite as much in taxes if you're a Canadian citizen. Furthermore, unlike the U.S., Canada does not require you to report your worldwide income for tax purposes. However, if you're earning income in another country, you may need to file paperwork with that country's tax agency to ensure that you are not being taxed twice for the same income. In addition to this, you'll need to pass a test on knowledge of Canada, pass a test on your ability to speak both official languages of Canada, English or French, and have a clean criminal record. As far as taxes go, Canada does not tax its citizens based on worldwide income. Rather, Canada only taxes its citizens and residents on income earned in Canada. However, if you earn income abroad, you may be required to report it to the Canada Revenue Agency in order to avoid double taxation. It allows you to live and work in over 187 countries without a visa. U.S. citizens also have the right to vote in U.S. elections, serve on a jury, and run for public office. So why would anyone choose not to become a U.S. citizen or have a U.S. green card? Well, the main reason is taxes. Unlike most countries in the world, the U.S. taxes its citizens no matter where they live. So even if you live and work abroad, you still need to file U.S. tax returns and pay taxes to the U.S. government. Now, there are ways to avoid this tax obligation by filing certain waivers. However, you may still have to pay taxes to your country of residence. So, effectively, you end up paying taxes to two different countries. It also doesn't help that the U.S. tax system is incredibly complicated. There are a ton of forms that need to be filed, and many Americans struggle with the complexity of it every year. And then there's the issue of being liable for military service. While it's unlikely that the U.S. will ever draft again, men should be aware that they could potentially be called to service in the event of a national emergency. This liability generally ends when you turn 40. Additionally, while the U.S. has an amazing passport, it comes with some complications. For example, if you have a U.S. passport and a second passport in another country, you may have to pay more in taxes to that foreign country because the U.S. has tax agreements with many other countries around the world. In addition to this, you may be subject to military service in that other country. And finally, if you live in another country and want to run for public office there, you may not be able to do so while you're a U.S. citizen. These are just some of the reasons why people may not want to be a U.S. citizen or have a U.S. green card. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. Let us go ahead and dive into today's hot topic, Canadian citizenship versus a U.S. green card. Which one is better? Well, if you were born in Canada, you automatically had Canadian citizenship at birth. However, to keep that Canadian citizenship, you need to either spend 3 out of the last 5 years in Canada or have lived in Canada for 10 years out of the past 20. But there are exceptions to this rule for people who have worked abroad for Canada or served in the Canadian Armed Forces, etc. As far as the U.S. is concerned, anyone who is born in the United States is automatically a U.S. citizen. However, if you were born outside of the United States, you may have acquired U.S. citizenship through a parent, grandparents, or through marriage. If you're not sure of your status, you can always file a U.S. citizenship application, and the USCIS will review it and let you know. So when it comes to citizenship, there's 2 types of citizenship that can potentially apply to you. You may be someone like me who was born in Canada but has lived most of their life in the United States. In that case, you may have the option to choose between renouncing your Canadian citizenship and keeping your U.S. citizenship, or you may be someone who currently lives in Canada or currently lives in the United States who has either applied or intends to apply for citizenship in the other country. So in that case, you will need to decide whether you want to become a Canadian citizen or a U.S. citizen. What are the requirements to become a Canadian citizen versus the requirements to get a green card? But why would anyone choose to give up their U.S. citizenship or decline a U.S. green card? When it comes to Canada, in order to become a Canadian citizen, okay. So now that we've covered the basics of each of these citizenship programs, let's talk about the pros and cons of each of them. When it comes to taxes, Canada has a progressive tax system that is similar to the U.S. Finally, when it comes to military service, Canada does not have a mandatory military service program. Now let's talk about the U.S. green card. Finally, if you hold dual citizenship and you are a green card holder, you may be subject to military service in the U.S. if you are a male. Alright, so those are the basics of Canadian citizenship versus a U.S. green card. So which one is actually better? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends.